So fast forward to now in your current role, a lot of what you're doing is around the TV space. How have you seen that landscape change over the years and how has it evolved?
TV planning and measurement is evolving, but that process is already in place. I think it's interesting to look at the reasons why it needed to evolve. Evan Shapiro, he's really focusing on the viewing differences between generations. Like the 16 to 34 group, this is for TV only, in-home. Netflix and YouTube are 1 and 2. BBC was number 3. Like there's no commercial broadcaster in the top 3 for that age range. Whereas when you look at the 35 plus group, the top 4 is all broadcasters and pay TV. So the opportunity to find viewers for advertising exposure in commercial airtime with broadcasters is completely different. And how we need to plan for them, what tools and data sets we need to understand where they are and how to reach and measure for them is very different. So those reasons to need to evolve are very clear.
Hello and welcome to the AdTech Heroes podcast. In today's episode, we're going to talk about TV measurement and work-life balance in the AdTech industry. I'm delighted to be joined by Andy Beams, who's the VP Enterprise Partnerships EMA at Samba TV. Hi, Andy. How's it going?
Hey, Dale. Yeah, very good. Good to be here. How's things?
Really good my side as well. Thank you. Let's get straight into it. I'd love to understand more about your career and what's got you to where we are here today.
Yeah. So, we looked at this up when you kind of post these questions before and realize I've tipped the 2-decade mark in the industry, which was, I don't know if it's impressive or scary. Certainly made me feel old. It was just over 20 years last year. I guess the last 10 or 15 have been quite specifically AdTech. So I had a brief stint in recruitment when I first started, digital recruitment, but kind of liked the look of this digital media thing and wanted to get kind of fully involved in the industry. So kind of placed myself almost. And so since at portals, X1 to do in Orange, some kind of property websites specifically, but then got into kind of mobile ad tech in 2012 and I worked for Bliss. I was one of the first employees there. I think we're a company of about 10 people at the time, literally like in a basement on Bercy Street. So worked there for 7 or 8 years. That was quite a defining part of my career, I think. We kind of grew from 10 people to 250, 300 people, opened up new markets, that kind of thing. So we can really enjoy kind of scaling up the ad tech business there, which was loads of fun. And I moved from there to be the general manager of AdSquare in the UK. So ran the UK P&L for those guys for a couple of years. And then I've been at Samba for about 3 years in the summer. So after a decade or so in location across Bliss and AdSquare, really felt the itch to kind of go and learn something completely new. So I found myself here in this kind of TV, DTV space, quite specifically on kind of data measurement field, which has been super interesting, like super challenging, learning a whole new industry. But it's been a fascinating one. So yeah, really, really enjoyable.
Amazing. And have your roles changed a lot in those 3 kind of ad tech companies that you mentioned? It'll be great to understand that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you kind of take in those 3. Like when I started at Bliss, I was very much an agency seller, agency facing IO managed service kind of business. And then the last year or 2 at Bliss onwards, then AdSquare and Samba, I focused more on the kind of data and measurement side of things. So a bit more interested in kind of evolving towards longer sales cycles, more complex technical sales cycles, working more with publishers and the ad tech side of the industry rather than the advertiser agency side of the industry. So the role I was doing, start Bliss was 13 years ago, to what I'm doing now are definitely very different roles. Dare I say it, I feel I've matured through those roles. I don't think I'd have had the maturity and capability to be doing that role in my 30s, but in my 40s, it's a different story. Definitely very different roles, but it's nice that the industry kind of provides those options to kind of move through the gears should you want to.
Definitely. And do you think the skill set required is very different to be, for example, selling into agencies versus ad tech and publishers? Do you feel that there's certain traits or skills needed for each of those roles?
I mean, fundamentally, I'm still in a sales role. It's a commercial role. It's a revenue target. So that kind of deal closing element is still a specific skill set. But I think because the customers you sell to are very different, the kind of behavior required from it is also quite different. When you work with an agency, you tend to work with people, the age range tends to skew younger. There's a lot more kind of entertaining and lunches and nights out and things like that than there are at the older age, where the customers are more my age, dare I say. It tends to be a different sell. People are less interested perhaps in kind of the wining and dining and entertaining part of it. And the fact that it's a complex technical sell, like it's really getting into the weeds of what's under the bonnet. And a lot of media ad tech doesn't necessarily need or require that. It's, for better or worse, agency sales focus can be quite opaque sometimes. Whereas the DaaS pieces, you're literally giving the customer the raw ingredients. They're seeing the data that you've got. Like they know what it does, what it doesn't do. So the levels of kind of transparency and kind of working through that process and having at least a reasonable technical knowledge are definitely different to IO sales. That part's different for sure.
Definitely. So fast forward to now in your current role, a lot of what you're doing is around the TV space, the measurement space as well. How have you seen that landscape change over the years, and how has it evolved, would you say, when it comes to TV planning and measurement?
I think it's interesting because TV planning and measurement is evolving, but that process is already in play. This isn't some kind of rallying cry to say it needs to evolve. Like that process is already happening. But I think it's interesting to look at the reasons why it's needed to evolve. And brilliantly, and this is amazing timing, Evan Shapiro put out his, I'm not sure he calls it, but kind of UK viewership stats. So he analysed, I think, all of 2024's Barb viewership figures and kind of put out a report that he's kind of road-showing at the moment. So it's some really interesting stats in that kind of support some of this. And he's really focusing on the viewing differences between generations, kind of what we had versus what's coming, because it's prevalent in the 16 to 34s, but thinking about it, that as those age groups grow up, will that continue? What does it look like? The differences between viewing hours on services and platforms between the two groups is really stark. Like the 16 to 34 group, this is for TV only, and it's obviously for in-home because it's Barb. Netflix and YouTube are 1 and 2. BBC was number 3. There's no commercial broadcaster in the top 3 for that age range. Like ITV, Sky, and Channel 4 come in at number 5, 6, and 8. Whereas when you look at the 35 plus group, the top 4 is all broadcasters and pay TV. BBC is top still, but 2, 3, and 4 are commercial airtime. So the opportunity to find viewers for advertising exposure in commercial airtime like broadcast is completely different. Shapiro goes as far as actually saying that broadcasters are irrelevant for that age range. Like, those are his words, not mine. But it's interesting to look at what that difference is. You can realise how high Netflix and YouTube are, because they're 1 and 2 for the 60 to 34 group. So obviously there are ad tiers or ad tiers and non-ad tiers, and they probably skew. YouTube will have majority ads, Netflix will have majority non-ads, but where we find those audiences is very different with those age ranges. So those changing behaviours, focusing on the kind of younger millennials downwards to Gen A, their viewing behaviours versus 35 plus group, and how we need to plan for them, what tools and data sets we need to understand where they are and how to reach and measure for them, is very different. So the reasons to need to evolve are very clear. Those stats are really interesting. And it's fascinating to see that process. We're watching this play out live in the industry at the moment, right? We're seeing Barb evolve. They're bringing on new data sets, new methodologies. They're talking about clean rooms. We're seeing things like Origin coming into the market. We're seeing lots of independent AdTech come in. I mean, think about from a planning and measurement perspective, there are independent tools for agencies like Lightbox. There are like specific DR measurement outcomes we never focused on before. People at Adlizer, Innovid. Like it's not just industry level. I think for the average advertiser, it needs to be adopted at industry level. It needs to be in that currency or joint venture. But the fact there is a lot of exciting independent ad tech means there's a lot more to be measured for in that space as well. So I think it's an interesting place at the moment.
Yeah, it's always great to see the innovation and new players come in, right? Because I think ultimately enables us to service the advertiser a lot better, and of course the consumer as well. And with these new data sets that are emerging, what opportunities and challenges do you see for the advertisers? Because they're probably thinking a certain way, or they have been thinking of AdTech or CTV in a certain way over the last few years, and now with this new set of data, they're probably going to have to think differently, right?
What's fascinating here is the change in behavior has been driven by on-demand content, IP-delivered content, whether it's YouTube, Netflix, Disney. I mean, there's a lot of social, by the way. When we talk about social, there's a lot of social in this the 16-34 group when you look at viewing time as well. Much higher when you look at all screens than just TV, obviously. But regardless, the viewing behavior that has changed has been facilitated by IP-delivered content one way or another. So you can argue that IP-delivered content is kind of the source of the challenge, source of the change of behaviors and why we need to evolve and measure differently. I think it's also the supply of the solution. The data that's coming in that way, whether it's from someone like Samba or ACR technology, whether it's IP-connected viewing behaviors, the data sets that live within that and how that allows us to connect between this is one viewer on broadcast, on this SVOD, that SVOD, connect that to an external social platform for measurement and planning purposes. It's the challenge and the solution, the problem and the solution all at once. It's happened, but it provides us the data to kind of pull that stuff together, because we do need to use that data to better understand how to connect it. And social, I think, is a big part of it. I see lots of social platforms measuring themselves versus TV, proving the point that as his younger age groups who are lighter TV viewers are into those platforms, and like TikTok came up incredibly high on the all four screens breakout for viewership. So people are now want to prove the efficacy of their platform for outcomes, for reach, for what it happens to be. But that's only possible by being able to connect what's on the television with what they're doing. So I think those kind of outcomes are super interesting.
How can this improve the campaign effectiveness as well for the clients?
I think what it offers us is the opportunity to measure for different outcomes that we perhaps weren't thinking about in the broad TV sense. You go back 10 years, and this is certainly not an exclusive statement, it's quite sweeping, but where TV was perhaps more focused on top of funnel, reach and frequency, fame building, that kind of thing. As addressable TV has come in, as CTV, programmatic buying, those kind of digital metrics, it's attracted a lot more DR-based clients. Perhaps people who were spending exclusively in social before, smaller budgets, focus on the budget, focus on the impressions, capping, etc. But they might have measured for DR-based outcomes. That opportunity now exists for TV-type advertisers. DR TV kind of conjures up heads, certainly for me at my age, of kind of shopping TV channels, which is QVC and stuff like that, which is just not the case. It sounds ridiculous. So when you've got outcome-based measurement for a web conversion, a web visit, a download, an install, a shop visit, physically, whatever it happens to be, the opportunities to use TV for a different purpose that play a different part of the funnel, I think that's a big thing. That part will keep growing.
And you think on that point there, do you think the likes of your Netflix and Disneys of this world have thought about that as a strategy as well? Or do you think they're more looking at more the branding budgets to go after in the market?
My guess, and this is purely a guess because I haven't seen it into the contrary, is that with limited reach, where the ad tiers, subscriber numbers are still relatively small. I know they're growing, and Netflix say half all new sign-ups up on the ad tier and that kind of thing. But as a proportion of overall inventory, it's still relatively low. So when the supply is finite, and from what I've heard in the industry of their CPMs being pretty high, I've got to assume it's branding budget. It's saying to an advertiser, we've got an audience here that's not watching broadcast TV, commercial broadcast TV anymore. There's an ads tier here on Netflix. you're going to get the same reach in a premium environment, brand safe, all that stuff, that you can't find that light TV viewer in over there on commercial airtime. So they've kind of flicked that function. I can't really see how CPMs in the 20, 30, 40, whatever they are going to perform particularly well on an outcomes basis, just purely because of the cost.
I was going to say, because it kind of then relates to the open web as well to some extent, right? Because it comes down to price, margin, etc. And if you just simply priced out, it doesn't matter if there's a certain audience on top, the quality of inventory to a certain extent, right? I know the industry trying to push towards that, but what I've seen is over the years, it's still CPM, CPC cost, etc. is still one of the primary reasons why one platform is used over another. So, yeah, no, I agree with you. I would wanted to just kind of get your take on some of these players now that are working in this space.
Yeah, I mean, like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something I'm missing in the strategies of the big S sort of players that I've not seen. I'm not an advertiser. I'm not a buyer. There's perhaps some of those kind of conversations I've not been privy to. But
and another, from what I can, another point there is obviously a lot of the social platforms like your Metas. I think what's the stat that always goes around, about 80% is SMBs, right? Rather than the big holdcos or the agencies. I feel there as well. I can never imagine in the CTV space that it will be 80% SMBs, right? And what have you mainly seen? Is it mainly the 6 holdcos, the big agency groups across EMEA that are spending on CTV, or you're getting some of these independent spenders, one-off spenders as well?
Yeah, you're definitely getting independents. And I think there are still DR-focused type clients in the holdcos. Like every agency will have some kind of DR. Yeah, a response is a purchase, an outcome, right? Everyone's trying to sell a product in one way or another, some of them more explicitly than others. So I think you've got, and I see we work with some partners who measure for outcomes using our data. I see the kind of clients they work with out of agencies, Mindies and holdcos. So I think that DR piece, it exists. I think what they're trying to work out is what channels work most effectively for it. What's the cost of that outcome relative to the cost of the sale, et cetera, et cetera. So that stuff is there. That stuff is there for sure.
And in your experience, working at an EMEA level, have you seen a lot of differences when you look at market by market, whether it's consumers or behavior or kind of like advertiser behavior in the CTV space?
So my focus is on the kind of the EU5 markets. So the big UK, France, Italy, Germany. So obviously there are more mature CTV buying markets within that 5. But on a relative scale, I think that 5 are a lot more mature than some other smaller economies. So I don't think the diversity of the spectrum here is too big within those 5. What I suspect is if you started going into smaller economies, like CCE countries and stuff like that, you might see very different behaviours. But that's pure speculation.
Makes sense. Tell me more about a report that Samba TV released. It was last year, right? That you guys had a UK state of viewership report that was announced.
Correct. So another one is actually due out imminently. We didn't quite record this in time to discuss the new one, but we put out a state of viewership report. So Samba's data, content recognition, first-party viewership data in TV. So we analyse hours and hours and hours of content to have kind of a point of view on what's happening in TV, the changing in linear impressions versus streaming impressions, the top shows, the top networks, that kind of thing, all based on Samba's first-party data.
And were there any key stats that kind of stand out for you, or any results that kind of that you think is really interesting?
Yeah, so brilliantly, you pulled out the same stat I pull out all the time when we talked about this last time. So that stat around 92% of linear impressions reaching half of households. I think a lot of people jump on that stat. That's one of my favorites as well. I'll just say that again here, so I didn't quite get it. Of all linear impressions, 92% of those only reached half of UK households. So basically, almost all impressions, ads, only reached half of households, right? I find that first time I saw that, and it's been fairly consistent the last couple of years I've been here, but the first time I saw it, I stopped and think about it. That can't be possible. But those 50% are seeing all those impressions. Those are our heavy TV viewers. Those are the people in the UK that watch hours and hours of TV. And I mean, like commercial airtime, ITV, Channel 4, etc., etc. We're talking about ads here. So this isn't even including BBC, which is the biggest single broadcast, just no ads on it. They're watching hours of TV. And because they're watching so much, they're oversaturated. They're seeing the vast majority of impressions. So you've got a reach curve that goes up very quickly over time, reaching those households, and then plateaus after a period because it can't reach net new households. It's reached a big enough, long enough budget will reach to 50% at some point relatively quickly. But then the curve just kind of carries on flat because reaching those light TV viewers, they're so occasional. I'm a household like this. My exposure to commercial airtime in any form, whether it's live or catch up, is pretty limited. I'm quite a heavy streaming ad-free household. So the amount of money an advertiser has to spend in linear TV, they reach the same people again and again, so the frequency is massive. But the cost per incremental point to suddenly find the occasional light TV viewer that dips in very sporadically will cost a fortune. Which is why we get to this point where advertisers start going, okay, well, where else do I find these people? Where are these viewers? If they're not on TV, and it's going to cost me an absolute silly amount of money on a cost per incremental reach point, where's my money better spent? How do I start looking around? Is it because I'm buying linear and I should be buying the same broadcaster and VOD? Or is it that this audience that simply are watching broadcaster TV? Yeah, see those Evan Shapiro stats above. Should they be looking in other channels? Should they be looking in Netflix and YouTube and TikTok and Amazon and things like this? It presents a challenge for it. Fortunately, the data is there to kind of be able to find the same people and connect them across other household level. But it paints a pretty clear picture of the challenge, right?
No, so it's definitely a good point. And do you see that number changing? If you had a crystal ball, do you think that will, from 50%, go down? I can't imagine it going up, right? But will it go down to 40, 30, 20% over the next 5 years, you'd say?
I mean, how quickly that will impact it. So I haven't looked at these stats on a demographic skew, but if you broadly look at those Barb Shapiro stats, we've got to assume that the 50% that it's reaching are the 35 plus audience. Mm-hmm. They're the ones we're saying, and they're watching lots of commercial airtime, ITV, Channel 4, Sky. So logically, it has to be that audience. Now, obviously, there's a huge portion of the population that's over 35, right? The majority of kind of disposable income target is in that age range. How that shifts over time, if the 16 to 34 behavior today continues, so we're assuming here that as Gen A's grow up, that behavior doesn't change in some way, or there's not something new or some relates back to broadcast. So let's just assume that stays the same for a second, and that age range keeps to kind of keep growing. You've got to start thinking that's going to eat into the heavy TV viewers, so that figure will start to come down. How quickly that will happen, I don't know. 5 years seems pretty short. But you go back to Shapiro saying that broadcasters are irrelevant for that age group. It kind of suggests that if the current trajectory continues, that will change. I think it might be longer term than 5 years.
Okay. And then I suppose relevant, but a little bit of a curveball. But so what, right? In terms of, okay, there's 50% is there from linear, and we're then looking at the alternative, which is targeting other areas on the screen, right, on the big screen. But then why are brands not then saying, well, okay, this is our strategy for TV and we're only hitting 50% of the addressable audience, but then we can go on social to make up for some of that, or we can go to audio targeting, we can do gaming, we can do, and is that the conversation you're also having in market, or are brands asking this question as well?
So a big part of the Samba proposition to advertisers on a targeting level rather than a measurement level, is around reaching those audiences elsewhere. So we provide an omnichannel reach extension or retargeting solution to be able to analyze that data. So if advertiser X comes to us saying that we understand the challenge, we know all the stuff we just discussed, we want to find audiences that haven't seen our TV ad. Like, please facilitate that. How do we find those people in the open web? How do you find them in display and online video and programmatic CTV or out of home on YouTube? Like other non-broadcaster channels, their challenge to us is we'll use your data for that targeting parameter. How do we identify who those households are to know that they are un or underexposed to the broadcaster ad? And how do we serve ads to them in other channels? That is the problem and the solution. That's really very much part of the world we live in, the kind of the value proposition that we have to advertisers and agencies.
Okay, and that makes sense. It's great to see that as well, right? Because I think at our own companies, we're always bogged down into this is, you can only, to the market anyways, this is the only thing that's available. But it's great to see that bigger picture and to see there are other solutions out there. And I think that's where collaboration comes into play. That's where we need to see what else is in the market and not just fixate with what our product is, especially as salespeople.
Yeah.
Which talking about households, talking about consumers, leads us to the kind of the second part of our podcast episode, which is talking about work-life balance, talking about generational shifts. And you're like me, a parent in the industry, in the AdTech industry. It'd be great to understand a couple of points, really. So I think the first question is, how do you balance being a parent while working in such a fast-paced industry, which is so much going on, start to finish, Monday to Friday, every week?
Yeah, it's a fair question because parenting is not optional, right? Parenting is it's a mandatory. Picking up the kids, taking the kids to school, dealing with a sick child is just what life throws at you in that situation, and you still got a job to maintain. So this is the respect where COVID was godsend, right? The initial pain aside, let's not belittle that in any way, but because that presented the hybrid life to everybody, the thought of working from home before, for most of my career, 15 years of my career, I don't think I did it more than 2 or 3 times. It felt quite alien, and certainly I wasn't set up for it. COVID comes along and forces this hybrid working to start with, and obviously come out the back of it, and we are in the world we're in today. But it's meant that being a working parent has been much more manageable for me. I'm obviously talking my own experiences here, but the ability to, not only do I find myself more productive, so I'm pretty better and more effective in my job than I've ever been in 20 years, because I can get more focus time and kind of get stuff done without distraction, but it means I can take the kids to school, be at my desk earlier than I would be if I come to the office. I came to the office today, got it from 9:30. Other days I can be working half an hour earlier than that. Days I've got to pick the kids up. It's a 10-minute, school's a 10-minute walk from the house. So I can work almost right up until the moment I've got to pick them up from after school club and get the work longer days, work more hours and collect the children. I dread to think how people survived before. When someone had to do a 3:15 pickup from a school, and I live in London, not everyone lives in London, they've got longer commutes. But to be able to get to those school gates, whether it's 3:15 or 5:30, whatever it is, how early you'd have to leave the office, make those hours back in the evening, or struggle to kind of get through your inbox. So from that respect, COVID has massively helped. As a working dad, I could be more involved as a parent, more in my kids' lives than perhaps dads of previous generations or parents of previous generations. And I can do more of my job. So, the answer here is, the answer is not COVID. The answer is hybrid working. The answer is flexible working. COVID has presented that solution to us, but that level of flexibility and in and out of the office as kind of not best suited necessarily, but the balance between company policy and managing a life has been brilliant. I think I would struggle to go back to 5 days in the office, be effective in my job, because at the top, I'm like, the parenting part isn't optional. That part doesn't go away. I still have to do that stuff. It just means I would be working into the evenings to catch up on the stuff I've missed.
Definitely. I think it's important, and especially you kind of touched on it just now about the generational shifts of previous generations. Obviously, I can only talk as a father, right? And the same with you. So there's a lot there. I feel like maybe we can do more now, like you said, because we can work from home as fathers, whether that's, like you said, pick up, drop offs. And yeah, of course, it depends on each situation, but I'd feel in the past, pre-COVID, there needed to be sacrifice from somewhere in terms of the father or the mother. And unfortunately, just the way, and we can obviously have this in a complete separate podcast episode, and it'd definitely be unfair for just me and you to talk about it without any mothers on the podcast, because I'm sure there's strong views on that front as well. But I feel like now there's a slight shift where I think the fathers are playing more of an active role in these kind of day-to-day, I don't even want to say tasks, because we shouldn't think of kids as tasks, but do you feel that's the case? Do you feel that that's actually happening, and the fathers are becoming a lot more hands-on? Because I think, again, I can speak from my experience. Like my father was very hands-on as much as he could be, but at the end of the day, he kind of like worked night shifts, and a lot of the time we would be with our mother, or in our case, his grandparents. So the reliance on grandparents was a lot in previous generations, and now I think a lot of people live quite far from, if they're lucky enough to still have their grandparents, they live quite far away from them. So I think there's less of a reliance on community, other family members, and now having that part filled with the father more active. I don't know, that's helping somewhat. I don't know whether you feel the same.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly like to think so, right? As much as there is still this injustice of gender pay gaps and things like that that need to be addressed, and we need to make sure that stuff is right. I think, like, if I look at my childhood, dad worked full time. He commuted. I grew up outside London. He commuted into London. Mum worked part time, and there was such a big pay gap that it makes sense for mum to work part time and do the childcare. That traditional role, right? Nonsense, but that's as it was at the time in the 80s. Financially forced them into that situation. So I would like, and sometimes I think they were stuck in that situation because of that. I really like to think that the fact that we can be more flexible, and as dads, we can do more of the childcare that's presented to us better because of the flexibility. And I'll talk about us as in AdTech. Everyone's work facilitates flexible working hours and office jobs and stuff like that. So I'm talking quite narrow here. But the fact that we have that option, that possibility, I would really like to think means that the balance of the child rearing responsibilities are leveling out and can be equal. It would be a real shame that's not happening, because it's presenting us the opportunity to level the playing fields and spend more time on our children. Like you said, make it sound like it's a chore or obligation. It's something that shouldn't be one parent's responsibility or the other, and frankly, it's something that I enjoy doing.
Yeah, definitely. And where do you feel that companies within AdTech, so the companies that we work for, can better support this work-life balance? And that's just not for fathers, that's for mothers as well. How do you feel that that we can get together? I'm not sure in what shape or form, but how could the industry help, and how could the companies within the industry help their staff and their teams?
I think continued flexible working. I think anything too structured and rigid is going to be problematic but I have to leave this summer. I can't get off until this time. Or, just pragmatically from an employer's point of view, I'm going to get less work done. I think we need to support that hybrid working to allow parents, fathers and mothers to be able to do what they need to do and do their jobs and pick up their kids. So I think protect that, but also I think we need to acknowledge we've really focused in here on the working parent, right? So I'm a working parent, so this is how work life should be, right? That's obviously very narrow and just focused on what you or I need out of our work lives. There are going to be other generations that have different points of view, different requirements. Some people prefer to come to the office. Like, I'm quite lucky in the respect that COVID and hybrid working came in when I was my late 30s. You know, I'd to a degree learned my trade. I've been around more experienced people when I was a graduate, and I was kind of coming up and I was around those people. And it came to a point where I had a decent work setup at home. I had a spare room and a desk and a permanent big monitor at home. So it worked really well for me. That's not the case for everybody. All right, to force the hybrid working rules based on the experience of the few, the kind of the more senior industry who are making the rules, is very short-sighted. To think about what the grants coming through now require, who are in flat shares, or I've seen people, so especially at the start of COVID, using ironing boards as desks, or like there's like 5 people in a flat share around the kitchen table, all trying to take calls at the same time. Like, everyone's working situation is very different. So we need to understand the requirements of everybody and allow the flexibility. Some people want to come to the office more. And I've seen some research saying that Gen Zs prefer it. Maybe it's the working environment at home. Maybe it's the fact that they want to learn from people, or they need to be around more experienced seniors and there's mentorship opportunities. But forcing one set of flexible working rules in for everybody is never going to work. We've got requirements and needs in our lives for work-life balance as parents. They're going to be different for people who are 10, 15, 20 years younger than us, who are kind of very different place in their careers. So I think we need to make sure we get that stuff right. Otherwise, I sometimes worry that if the younger generations who are still learning their trade aren't coming to the office, aren't being around people, and what if the senior people aren't in the office as much? So that the juniors are in, the seniors are, and that doesn't work, because then the juniors have got no one to learn from. And we need to make sure that that kind of perpetuation of skills and work ethics and whatever it happens to be continues. And we've probably reached that point in our careers where that's kind of incumbent on us to make sure we're helping to facilitate.
Yeah, I think the key there is the balance, right? It's probably and really understanding and being empathetic from these leaders within the organizations to really understand each individual circumstance. So as a parent of 3, for example, where there's not a lot of access, especially in the UK, to affordable childcare or nurseries, etc. We that's again a big topic there, which I think a lot more could be done in the space. There might be a tendency, say, to tell that person, yeah, you can work X amount of days in the week, whereas someone that isn't in the same situation, but maybe the same age, right? They might not have that situation, and but it's tough. Like, I can imagine it's tough for organizations to navigate now, because we got to a certain norm over the pandemic, didn't we? Where most people were working from home. They all, on a Friday could get things done that would have usually been done on a Saturday, whether it's chores at home or shopping or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think the key here is just navigating it with empathy and understanding each individual and their circumstances, and at the same time, like you said, to provide that support for the next generation that's coming through, pushing through in our industry. Because if all of us are working from home 5 days a week, where are they really going to learn from? And also it depends on the role, right? If it's a sales role and you're working from home 5 days a week, you could argue, well, you should be helping with your clients, but then they could also come back to you with, well, every sales call now is a call, right, rather than a meeting. So there's, I suppose, different ways to look at it. There's probably an argument for and against every single situation. I don't think we'll ever find the answer, but I think it's just about navigating it with, like I said, with empathy, which is the key thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the key word here. Navigating with empathy is key, and I think the flexibility part is key. Like, hybrid can be rigid. Hybrid sounds like it's flexible because in and out of the office, but if they're specific dedicated days with no flex on it around your circumstances, then that is rigid. The flexibility and hybrid are not the same thing.
So you feel like these announcements by some of these big companies saying 4 days a week, Tuesday's the day, for example, that you can work from home, every else, you think that's just as bad, would you say?
It depends how far down that road people go. I mean, 4 days. The overall ad tech industry, 4 days feels on the more extreme end. Most companies are kind of 2 to 3 days. It seems to be quite common. Forcing in 4 days and forcing certain days is going to make some people's workloads more problematic. And I'd be interested to see what happens, because you're obviously talking about WPP here, right? If we look at it from an agency point of view, your WPP are the exception to the rule, and the other holding codes are probably more flexibility. Then the agency worker has choice. Okay, but somewhere else where it does work for my circumstances, if all the hold codes adopt that mentality that there is no choice, that's just what agency life is like. So it's interesting to see what road they go down. So I think, unless I've missed something, WPP are the furthest down that direction of the whole codes that I've seen so far, but I'm not as close to the agencies these days.
Yes, it's definitely a risk, right? Because you don't want to lose your best talent, and I think that's happening a lot. And yeah, if you're working a couple of days from home a week, and like me when I was in the UK, costing £30 a train fare to go down into London every day, it makes a big difference, right? And yeah, it's whether it's worth that risk or not, if you think you will be able to keep your staff, but then you would need to think of other motivations, right, and other benefits. So it's a very complex web here, I think, that needs to be navigated.
Yeah, totally agree.
We've got a final question for you on this episode, and I'd love to get your take on it. If you had a superpower in AdTech, what would it be?
I think what would have been really useful, especially when I was agency selling, would have been mind reading. I feel like there's probably a lot of excuses and reasons for people to make plans sometimes. Yeah, there are only so many times the budget got cut. Like, that's true 10% of the time, 30% of the time. But I feel like it was an excuse that got you to agency sellers 80, 90% of the time. So sometimes you just want to know what's actually going on. Like, what's the real reason? Is it something I can improve on? Is it something I can fix? Something I can do about it? Just to be able to read their mind and know the truth in that situation. That would have been handy.
I think that's a brilliant answer. I think our listeners that are media owners are probably facing this daily, right, when they're chasing their brief responses. And I can definitely relate to that as well. No, brilliant answer. I think that's all we have time for in today's episode. Thank you, Andy, for your time. It was great speaking to you.
Great. Likewise. Thanks, Del.